Hey, I'm Joy Nkoyo, your host for this podcast. Join me as I delve into the minds of fellow artists and find out about their inspirations, creative process, and personal journeys. This is Noise in the Gallery, a podcast to inspire.
For me, my stage persona throughout my life has been an opportunity for me to explore things that maybe I felt were too taboo or were too outlandish. What I like about doing this crazy thing that we're doing of creating work and then putting ourselves out on the line and creating larger than life characters on stage and, you know, living these dual lives, these oxymorons, is that I think I enjoy creating an experience for someone, creating an experience for the audience, creating an experience for me to look back on and go, wow, I created that, you know.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to me.
My absolute pleasure.
I would like to maybe start off by going through your journey so far. And I think we can't really do that without mentioning your parents, who are both incredible musicians. And I mean, how lucky to kind of grow up with that in your family. Yeah, how was it for you growing up? I wouldn't say they were eccentric in the traditional sense of the word, but they definitely weren't your cereal packet family.
No, I think they were just unusual.
Yeah.
Sort of saw the status quo and went, really? Do we need to do that? You know, I think they were those sort of people. But yeah, my what was my upbringing like? It was, I mean, from all perspectives, I think it was quite atypical. Growing up with these two musicians and lots of creativity in the house all the time. My mum basically taught me everything I know, you know.
Really?
So she, from a very, very young age, she had me playing piano from about 5 years old. Gosh. And I was a little bit stubborn with the piano. You know, I was always playing instruments from very young. So I played the saxophone when I was about 9 years old, and I've been playing the piano since 5. And piano for me was homework at that point. It was sort of like, oh, have I got to play the piano? You know, basically, if I had to say my exact passions, it was gaming. I was really into gaming. I loved Zelda.
Oh, great.
At that time, and I was also really into acting. So I was, you know, that was my big moment. As I was an incredibly quiet kid, but every time I would get up on stage, I would be this sort of like, you know, flamboyant.
Right, so you were in like school plays and things like that?
Yeah.
Well,
like
okay,
that.
so I didn't actually know that about you. I know more about your self-directed works. Yeah, so Ben would spend summers kind of making these long cinematic experiences, we'll call them, not films, which I haven't had the pleasure of seeing. But I've heard so much about.
Well, they don't exist anymore, Joy. There's absolutely no copies of them.
Right. Oh, that's a shame.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, it was that sort of thing. So we made lots of films. Me and Joe Neal, who now plays drums for me. But then, from about 13 years old, it was I got into, or maybe even earlier, sort of 11 years old, I got really into Bob Dylan, and that was the first album I bought.
Right.
In HMV, rest in peace.
Oh man, true millennials.
And that was my first album, and it just kind of really inspired me to almost completely switch, almost overnight. I stopped playing games, and I said, no, I want to be a singer-songwriter. And
that's really wild, actually. That's quite a change to just like that.
Yeah, it was quite sudden. I think I tend to get quite obsessive about whatever I'm doing. So it tends to be like, move on.
The stage career died, and that was the end of that. Would you say that, because it's worth mentioning your dad was a jazz musician, do you feel like that was an area where you cut your teeth much at all, or not really? Because I always assumed that like jazz was your background, and then you kind of came to singer-songwriter after. I didn't realise it was there so early for you.
Broadly speaking, you could say that it was my background. I never really it took me a long time to really get the spark for it. And I sort of, I would never, consider myself a jazz musician now, but I really started to enjoy it in my mid-20s, to be honest.
Oh, really? Wow, okay.
I think
That's cool.
what I got from jazz at that time was kind of like a background and an understanding of harmony, which really you can get from all sorts. It's just theory, isn't it?
True.
But it's I think at that time I sort of saw jazz as the thing that my parents did.
Yeah, so there was your rebellion.
I think that was, yeah.
It was there somewhere. Yeah. No, because I think I feel torn about this, because for me personally, neither of my parents are musical at all. And so what was quite nice is that I had this sense of ownership of, this is my thing and I'm entirely responsible for it. But then, I still feel a little bit jealous where it's like, it would be lovely to play with my family or have that understanding or just be able to learn from them. So I think it's, that's kind of interesting that you've found your area.
I would definitely say that I think it would be very spoilt of me to complain about it, because it was on most fronts it was a foundation that I sort of tried to take less and less for granted the older I get, and I think I think the only problems that really came up is that it's quite a lot of pressure to be around people who know so much about what you're trying to cut your teeth on. So I think if there are any sort of difficulties, I think that was one area. I remember when I was younger sort of wanting to turn around. Well, no, I did turn around and say, I want to be able to make my own mistakes. I know that you can hear me from the next room and guide me, but I don't always want that. I want to sort of fluff things up myself,
Good on you for being able to say that at that age and sort of know that's what you needed. That's cool.
I guess so. Yeah.
I guess. So this last year, 2023, you dropped your debut album, We Are All Naked. Is it We're or We Are?
I think it's We're. Yeah.
We're All Naked in the Eyes of the Divine.
I don't even remember.
Just Divine, the Divine album.
I
like
call it
that.
the Divine album most of the time.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, what people might not know is that, the groundwork for this album was laid many, many years prior. It's been a whole process. And, it's born out of a very difficult time for you. Sadly, Dave passed away 2019. So, in that lead up to, he got diagnosed with terminal cancer. What year was that?
2016.
So, 3 years. That whole process sparked you writing this album. Can you talk a bit about making this album, how it started for you?
So chronologically it started with 2 tracks I wrote on the album, Midori and Fiddly as the Tune, and they were sort of, I would call them peripheral subjects of what was going on. I think those were the first songs I wrote, and they weren't specifically dealing with the subject matter. Midori is inspired by a Murakami novel. Free in the city. And Fiddly is the Tune is a sort of, I don't know, a rundown of late stage capitalism.
Right, okay.
Bet shop shindig. Maybe I will win big. Buy myself a brand new car. Maybe I will grow up to be a star. Buy myself a brand new car.
Those are the two tracks I started with, and I took them to Andrea's studio, Andrea, who produced those 2 tracks, and we made that there, and I think that was kind of the foundation of the album.
Did you know at that point you wanted to make an album?
No.
Okay.
No, it's at that point it was just singles. And then the songs I wrote, I think the first song that I wrote kind of it happened in a very strange, almost fantastical way. When my father was first ill, He'd been away, and he'd come back, and I'd heard on the phone that he'd been screaming in pain, and it'd been very painful for him, and I thought it was his back, because he had a lot of back trouble.
Right.
And then he came home, and he was really in pain, and I heard him the morning of him arriving back, and I remember just being in my room, and I could hear him screaming, and I just got a really bad feeling about it. And I remember instinctively just going to my notepad and writing down the first line of Divine, "Furious morning, look at yourself,"
Furious morning, look at yourself.
And I think that was really the start of the kind of the bulk of the material, which came to be centered around what was about to happen in my life for the next 3 years,
I mean, yeah, there's a few things there. What's so hard, I imagine, was, trying to write about grief and pain, and you're building a link between the present and then this inevitable future whilst trying to remain hopeful.
To put it into context, Dave's way of coping with such an existential horror of your own death was denial. So he was all about positivity. He was all about fighting the illness. I think he really believed up until the very last moments of his life that he was going to live, and despite what he was told by doctors or anything like that, he did a lot of kind of these juicing regimens and
health kicks,
all the alternative stuff. When the drugs had stopped working, he kept going with a lot of this stuff, and his way of coping was, to all intents and purposes, it was denial. And I realised in hindsight that I didn't want to shatter that. So I wrote a lot in code, kind of subconsciously. That was one of the big elements, is that I wanted him to be able to hear the lyrics.
Wow, I mean, it's so interesting, because to me, it was never that cryptic what it was about, knowing what was going on at the time. Just the themes and to me it was always very rooted in what was going on.
Well, I think it's one of those things, is I'm sure it was the elephant in the room whenever he's listening to the material, but when things are coded, you don't necessarily have to think about them. I think when you find out exactly what the meaning is, then that's when it becomes difficult to listen to. I think it was almost as if it was the kind of direct mentioning of it that would have been particularly difficult. And at the same time, I think I did also realise that I liked the aesthetic quality of it, that I liked exploring things without explicitly saying what they are. And I think that had always been a feature of my writing.
You can still say a lot with a metaphor, without being very grotesque or explicit about things. This technique of stream of consciousness writing, when did you come across that, and kind of had you used it before this point?
So that's something that I think when I was writing that album, I think I'd be hard pressed to call it stream of consciousness in one way.
Yeah.
Because I actually found it really difficult. Like, I think at that time my process was just like, it's not working, just like poring over the same lyric for hours and hours and hours. And so I think the stream of consciousness thing kind of came in actually in the last couple of years.
Right.
Where I started using it first as a tool to get out of like a pretty huge writer's block that I had after my dad died. And but it eventually became something which would spark my creativity, and I realised that it was also a tool to just get everything out onto the page, so that I could then piece it together, you know. And loads of people have done this in different kind of ways. Like I know Bowie would he would, I suppose that's slightly different in that you take sort of an outside material like a newspaper clippings or something,
right,
and you cut it up and rearrange it. I think I was doing that to my own thoughts, and kind of everything comes out and then you piece it together into something that makes sense. And I think stream of consciousness writing was the missing link for me, that I sort of slightly didn't have that when I was writing the album, but is now part of my process because I find that it gets me to the place that I was trying to get to on that record. It's like, you know, you find the most efficient or
way of getting there rather than the painful kind of. But that's the process of learning how you work best, right? What's the most kind of profound thing that's thrown up? Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll write stuff and the meaning of it takes on new life as time progresses, or maybe it just surprises me if I do, because I have tried this sort of stream of consciousness stuff, and I can be surprised sometimes by the things that comes out. Have you had a circumstance where you've been surprised or found something quite profound?
Yes, a lot more than I used to, actually. The more I do it, I think you know, maybe 5 years ago or something, I was in the headspace of like things. I had to be exactly sure what everything meant before it goes on the page, or it doesn't mean anything, you know. Yeah. And I've definitely, I don't see it that way anymore. So I write a lot more now in that way, where it's sort of the things come out and I sit there and I go, wow, didn't realize that was in there, you know. Where's that come from? And then you go, okay, that image sort of feels like it's saying something about this, you know. This is what it conjures up when I hear it, so let's see what the audience thinks, you know? I get it. It's a more abstract way of creating, isn't it?
The album combines like hard rock and soul elements. They're both quite high energy genres. Like I'm sure you hear Queen a lot. Yeah, Queen. But you mentioned Nirvana as well. What kind of drew you to those genres at the time?
So I was thinking this. I think I'd always been into soul because that was the music that I grew up with. You know, I was always introduced to Stevie Wonder and Earth, Wind and Fire.
I knew that was coming. I was like,
yeah, we have memories of Earth, Wind and Fire, don't we, from Brit school? Yeah. So all of that music is stuff I grew up with, and rock music not so much, especially the really heavy stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So in fact, I mean, when you would have known me at Brit school, I would have been a right sort of like traditionalist on like, you know, heavy music is terrible, and you know, if it happened after the 70s and it's not made by James Taylor, it doesn't exist to me, you know. Same with, I mean, I think the band that I've really enjoyed is Joe Neal played me Rage Against the Machine.
Great.
And if you could have filmed my reaction when I heard this record, it was sort of like somewhere halfway between this is the most amazing thing I've heard in my life and sort of like pure disgust. It was kind of, the sonics of it were to me, they were quite sort of, it was not something I was used to.
When was this, by the way? When did you remember roughly when he played you at?
It must have been a similar time, 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
And it must have been before, actually, because I think that started to influence my very first EP, which it's now sort of, it's available somewhere under
Bandcamp or something.
Literally, I think it's on Bandcamp. Yeah, so
you're digging, guys.
Yeah. The keen super fans will find it somewhere. So that's had started to influence me at that time. Honestly, it's one of those things I look back on, and I do think the anger of the music was really something that was all of a sudden speaking to me
Mm.
in a way that anger didn't feel as relevant to me as it did all before I was presented with my dad being ill.
Mm.
So I do think it was the rage in the end.
That's interesting.
I think there was this dichotomy of this sweetness and this soulfulness and this real anger that I think was coming through.
And then you kind of spent a lot of time in your basement basically making demos, and that was a real labour of love. Was Joe quite involved with that as well, I feel?
Yeah. So Joe Neal was co-writing a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we would sit there and make demos and just hang out really in the basement. We made about, I mean, every song on that record started off with the title Hard Soul and then a number after it.
I love that. This is where we're going. Hard Soul 11. Hard Soul 11,000. I love that.
So I think we did about 50 of those or something like that. And
these were just like instrumentals, or were these like actual songs?
They were instrumentals. Because they were instrumentals, yeah. In some cases, beats,
Yeah.
Usually verse, pre-chorus, chorus. I think that's... I take ages to write anything. So I don't want to flesh out an entire song and go, oh no, this is mid. Do you know what I mean? I want to have decided whether it's mid or not before I fleshed it out, So we just canvass these ideas and see which ones to follow through. And there are still some stuff in there that I wish we got round to,
I think it was cool though that a lot of it ended up on the album though, like stuff from your original demos. I think that was cool because you basically went and worked with a big music producer called Kipper, who's worked with Sting. So he was like pretty legit. I don't know how you met Kipper actually. How did you meet?
I think it was one of those things where a friend of a friend knew a friend who was a friend, and somebody approached him and said, there's somebody who wants to get into the music business and is writing an album and stuff. And he said, oh yeah, okay, all right.
Another one.
Yeah. And I sent him some of the demos. And actually it was some of the stuff, it was the stuff that I did with Andrea. It was the first couple of albums.
Fiddly is the Tune.
Fiddly is the Tune and Midori.
Yeah, I keep wanting to say Fiddler on the Roof.
I mean, I have thought of making a musical, but that's another...
Yeah. We'll talk about that after.
Define the musical.
I mean, it'd be sick. It'd be great.
So he was... I think it piqued his interest because I don't think he was expecting the kind of muso-y elements.
Right,
I think that was the point of view he was coming from, having worked with a lot of my idols like James Taylor and Sting and
he worked with James
like
Taylor?
He did, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it was super cool.
Wow.
Super cool.
Yeah, so you probably had this reverence for like the studio, and then it's pretty cool that actually some of those demo elements ended up on the album.
Yeah, so some of that basement stuff that I did with Joe, it ended up being on there, and I think I assumed, okay, here we go, it's the big time, if something isn't recorded through a Neumann right now, it doesn't exist, But I realised so much through that process that it's as much about vibe as it is about fidelity, and if not more so, especially for the music that we ended up making. I think it was one of my favourite words with Joe to use anything we described that was really good was janky.
Oh, I thought that was bad.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, so it is kind of.
Oh, okay.
But it's one of those. For us, it came to be a word that means something that sounds so bad that it's good.
Right. Okay.
So we go, oh my god, that sounds janky. So we do things like get bits of metal and play around with that, and we were just really into finding janky sounds,
Yeah.
And whilst we didn't entirely go down that route, there were still the studio elements that came in when Kipper sort of got us in the studio, quite literally, and it became this combination of things. But I realised we kept in quite a lot of the backgroundy things.
Yeah. How did you find working with Kipper, like the process? Was it very much meeting halfway, collaborative, or were there moments where Kipper was like, nah, this is what we're doing, like?
He definitely put his foot down on some things.
Oh really? Like what?
Without, I think there was a bit in Angels. It's when it goes to the bridge and it kind of switches up and it goes to this quite soulful place. I think me and Joe, when we did it in the studio, again, we had our janky hats on. So we were like, Joe had this cymbal, which he put another cymbal on top of it. So it made this kind of sound.
Sounds gorgeous.
Exactly, So it's, and we thought, oh my God, it sounds terrible. Let's do it, And so he kind of does this part, which is and he's on this cymbal, and it's sort of, to all intents and purposes, it sounds sort of bad but good, to my ears.
Yeah.
But Kipper was like, oh, you really want that soulful vibe in that section. You want it to go to just a hi-hat thing,
Is that Baby There's a Price Tag?
Yeah, that bit, yeah. So he was like, he insisted on the hi-hat part, and he just turned around and he said, look, we can talk about this, but I really think you should put that hi-hat part in. I said, yeah, go on. I wasn't necessarily attached to that bit. So there were moments, but I think for me it was quite, I think it was quite difficult for me to make it entirely collaborative, just because he was so much more experienced than I was.
Yes.
And I think
this is your first project.
I'd never made a record before in my life, and I had all these preconceptions of what it was and what it wasn't. And so there was probably an element of me holding back because I didn't want to, just waste time with sort of janky things that I've done in my But then I think Kipper is very. His ethos is not one of imposing his sound on what you do. It's one of enhancing what he interprets your vision to be. And so a lot of the time I found myself, whenever he present me with something, particularly if it's a way I'd never heard my music presented before, I think it took me a while to get used to that, first of all, because it was like he'd have this vision, particularly for the drums. I'd only ever heard my drums, in my room, in a very dry environment. It sounded like you were hitting bits of cardboard, So it was super, super, super dry, like it was a 70s drums or something like that. And he had this idea that he heard it as being this big John Bonham type rock sound. And I'd never heard that before. So when he played it to me the first time, I was kind of like, I don't know what to make of this. And it took me a few listens to kind of go, yeah, this is cool. I like this, and it's because I think I was presented with a lot of new stuff, so I had to sit with it.
Yeah.
And I think I ended up seeing where Kipper was going with it. So a lot of the time when he bring things to the table, I was down for it, And that certain things that maybe I did want to change or maybe draw a little bit back to the janky area, particularly the kind of verse sections on Angels and stuff like that. I did a final bit. I was kind of like, no, let me just do an extra 20% on this. And he said, go on. And I kind of brought it back into a place that was a little bit more edgy, a bit weirder. And he was like, yeah, that's it. We've captured it.
How was it thinking about releasing this album after what had been such a long time. So much has happened.
Yeah.
COVID, the world stopped. That's like 2 years basically wiped out for everyone. Your dad passing away. Yeah, was it quite daunting?
Yeah.
Really daunting.
Yeah, I found it, and I almost, you know, I don't talk about this very often, but it almost caused me to completely collapse on a human level, you know. I think it was,
Wow.
COVID itself was like, just, I guess from my point of view, you know, obviously it was poorly timed for everyone, you know,
Yeah.
there's never
Never
a good time for a pandemic
No.
of that magnitude. But, you know, from my point of view, it was a very difficult moment, sort of almost directly after my dad had died, to suddenly be in a space by myself.
Yeah, God.
So, you know, I kind of finished the record in that time, and then things kind of opened up, and I think it was always this sense of, okay, how do we release a record now? You know, we've made this record, and how do we do it? You know, and it was difficult to know which avenue to take. You know, I think it came out later than, in hindsight, I would have put it out, because it was sort of like I was between this idea of, oh, what if we try and get it, you know, heard by a label or something like that,
Yeah.
versus putting it out, you know, doing everything off your own, you know, independently. And I think the other element that obviously comes into this is I think the industry itself is at this kind of, or maybe more so then, but maybe for a number of years has been at this crossroads where it's like we're moving more into space where record companies expect you to have built the audience before you even approach them in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I found my headspace at the time was somewhere between get this heard by a label and no time like the present, you know. Let's go for it.
Yeah. Because I was going to ask, like, what was your outlook at that point? Because I'm sure you had kind of pushed back a little bit of people just being like, just drop the album, bro.
Yeah.
Like, just, you know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's your first thing. It's your baby. So how do you get the balance right? Yeah, knowing what to do is so difficult. So what did you do?
I definitely had that. I think that was almost a microcosm of a lot of the conversations I was having with my mum.
Just drop the album, bro.
Literally. You know, and then I suppose the difficulty is I definitely, more so then than now, but I'm definitely, my character tends towards wanting to do things right and not wanting to do things wrong.
Yeah.
And so I was quite precious about how it was going to happen. And also very anxious about how it was going to happen. And, you know, I think the the borderline existential kind of crisis, no, not crisis, that's a bit too much, but the...
Well, I think, you know, it wouldn't be invalid, to be fair.
You know what I mean? To put something out there. I mean, even to make the art it forces you to look at a lot of the bits of yourself you don't like and the things you're fearful of. And
But this is not just any album. Like, this is this album about what you've been through. And yeah, I mean, it's completely understandable that you would feel this existential dread and fear and anxiety. I think you're kind of downplaying it, because I would feel that just putting out a generic album about, like, I had a breakup 5 years ago kind of thing. Like, I think everyone goes through that, but it's your first album and it's a huge one, so... That's
true.
Yeah,
and I think there was the sense that because there had been this backing from Kipper, that I thought, right, I want to do it justice in the way that it's released. but I, the more I thought about it, I thought, I can only put my best foot forward, and you can't wait to convince
The right
the
person.
right person.
Yeah.
I think, and I think I'm glad that I have that out there as a, in retrospect, whatever anxieties I had at the time, I'm very glad I have that out there as a foundational project, because it's really like, okay, this is where I started, and it might not be exactly where I'm going to go, but this is where I started, and I'm proud of that, definitely.
Yeah, you should be. Do you feel like you kind of go, I could have put that out a bit earlier, actually, in hindsight?
Definitely, yeah.
It's interesting.
I sort of think I could have put that out a bit earlier, but I also look back on I look back on how difficult that time was, and it was so difficult to function on an everyday level for quite a few months of my life at that time, that I would be expecting too much of myself if I looked back on all of that and thought, you should have done this,
Yeah.
I think if I were to remove any emotion from it, and I were to be an emotionless sort of machine, I would go, I could have, pushed through the existential dread faster.
But you're a human being,
exactly,
of course, and I think you have to go through things to get the lesson. So it's all learning.
Totally.
How do you feel like the response has been to the album so far? Generally, has it been quite nice?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I've had so many kind of lovely messages, and people who it kind of really touched them, which in a lot of ways often takes me by surprise. Not because I don't believe in the work, but because in a lot of ways I feel so far removed from it. I wrote it so long ago. I almost look at it and see a different person. So I can't really. I'm no longer in there to the extent that I was emotionally. So when people kind of come to me and say that it kind of spoke to them and it brought them to tears, and it kind of it made them made them feel something. I think that I always find that really touching, because it puts me back in that space of like, oh yeah, that really came from somewhere.
Yeah.
So there's been some wonderful reception of it, definitely. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I think, it's like a whole other side to the coin that, as an artist, you're writing the music, but you're not necessarily thinking about how it's going to impact other people.
No.
Especially when it's such a kind of therapeutic album that you felt like you needed to make. It must be really nice and kind of a full circle moment to get that reaction and response from people.
It really was, yeah.
What do you feel like you've learned going through this whole process? I think just from the outside, you're so much more confident as a person now than when you started writing your album 5-6 years ago. Do you think like losing your dad has made you less fearful as a person?
I know. I don't think it has.
Right.
So it's this. I think it's made me maybe in a way that I don't understand yet. Maybe it has, but I think on the whole, I think it's made me more fearful overall. I think my overall experiences with grief and with my mum being sort of almost fatally ill when I was very young, it's made me very aware of some quite grisly things from quite a young age.
Yeah.
And I think that is, honestly, it's a fear which follows me, I think, and will probably be baked into my work and who I am as a person for, in one way or another. So I would say I am I'm more confident despite a lot of that stuff. I think is my honest feeling about it. I feel proud that I've overcome a lot of it, that I have managed to. I feel like I've managed to flourish after that story, but I feel like I've flourished despite it, I think.
That's interesting. It's not the answer I was expecting there. Yeah. It's like this idea of resilience and kind of building resolve despite having experienced really terrifying, difficult things.
Yeah. Resolve is a great word.
Yeah, it's resolve. It's like, I'm going to feel even more scared. I've seen dark shit, but if I don't do this thing, like, I've seen dark shit. You know what I mean? It's like, it is such a kind of oxymoron.
Yeah. I suppose that is that element of, it's what the CBT therapists always say, when you feel anxious about something, if you don't do it and you don't go through it, you usually find that it will build up more in your head.
You feed the monster.
Exactly, because the real thing you're really scared of is actually the stuff that's going on in your head rather than the reality of a situation. So I guess maybe there was that element, is that a lot of the fear came from the stuff that came before it. So yeah, maybe there was that element of it to take from it, is that I've been through it. So when it comes up again, it's like, I don't know. Maybe there will be some strength from that. I don't know.
Yeah. In terms of like, putting the music out there and facing the public or people, how much do you enjoy that side of things, putting yourself out there? Because you're on it with your promo right now.
There are two versions of me, I think. And in fact, oh my God, have you seen the Leonard Bernstein movie?
No, I need to. Yeah.
It's cool. It's cool. I liked it. I think there was a quote which I don't know whether it actually came. Maybe it was taken from a Bernstein interview. I can't remember the exact wording, but he essentially said to the effect of like, an artist lives two lives, especially when an artist also performs the work they've created.
Yeah.
There's the person on stage who is flamboyant and who is very out there and very confident, and then there's the person who makes the stuff, and that tends to be a very different way of living. It's a lot less about connection and people and vibe and great time. It's a very, I think he described the performance life as a rich outer world, whereas the art of creating something and sitting with something so long that you drive yourself mad with it is more of a rich inner world.
Yeah.
And I think when you're a singer-songwriter or a writer-performer, I think you live these two lives. I think you inevitably live these two lives. Purely speaking, for me, I think they're quite pronounced, those both ends of that spectrum. I do see myself as someone who's very introverted. I think I lean more naturally towards the writing in my own space part of it.
Right.
The performance part is something which is in there, but it's sometimes takes a bit of cajoling.
Yeah, okay, I completely relate to that.
Yeah, right.
Completely. I get in my own, like, kind of ruts, but I'm happy in them. I don't want to, I'm happy, just comfortable in my room. Doing my writing, coming up with my dream worlds and my, building my world.
That's it.
And then it's like, to go out and perform and network and talk to people and self-promote, and it's such a different part of your brain, your being, that it is really interesting, and something you mentioned about there being a kind of scale was quite interesting, because some artists, they bring those quite close together so that they make stuff in a more extroverted way, perhaps they collaborate, and then they post in a kind of introverted way, and it sort of all sits in the middle.
Oh, that's
Do you know what I
interesting.
mean?
Yeah, I see that. Yes, it's a very social way of making music, but you're also
You just post it. And,
I'm just
I'm
who
just
I
doing
am
my
in my
thing.
room.
Yeah.
Sitting on my bed.
And it works for them, and that's cool.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do feel that you definitely have, like, I mean, yeah, I've seen you perform. I think your set is so good now.
Thank you.
Yeah, your energy, your presence is just, like, incredible. But that's not an introverted person that you're looking at.
No.
I mean, it is, but like, when you're looking at it, you just would not know.
I think it's an introvert coping with a very unnatural situation.
That's so funny.
I think
What do you love about performing?
That is an interesting one, because sometimes I find it quite difficult. Sometimes I find it like, especially when I want it to go right, it's like I've really got to breathe. I think what I like about doing this crazy thing that we're doing of creating work and then putting ourselves out on the line and creating larger than life characters on stage and living these dual lives, these oxymorons, is that I think I enjoy creating an experience for someone, creating an experience for the audience, creating an experience for me to look back on and go, wow, I created that. I think for me, I find it hard to pinpoint the particular things, like, I'm doing it because I always love singing, or I'm doing it because I always love writing, or those elements come in, but it's like it's a lot more about I enjoy the whole picture, and I enjoy, honestly, okay, so I think honestly, thinking about it, I think it goes quite deep. So I think for me, my stage persona throughout my life has been an opportunity for me to explore things that that maybe I felt were too taboo, or were too outlandish, or even for me. I think it's the opportunity to do that in a space which is, because what it's like, you wear a dress on stage and people go, oh yeah, you're like Freddie Mercury, innit? But you do that in life, and there's more scrutiny. There's a social scrutiny that happens there. And with lots of things that I think, with being more confident, maybe being more outspoken in my music about things that as a person I might be more measured about. I think actually there's probably, for me, there's a catharsis in being able to explore things that I was maybe too afraid to in my life.
That's really interesting. Do you feel like now those lines have started to melt a little bit? Do you feel more confident in your real life now, or no? Do you still feel that kind of scrutiny?
I feel the scrutiny because we're still in that era, sadly. Socially speaking, but I would say that they are definitely starting to merge, those people, because I do feel a lot more confident in myself, and I stopped. There was a point in my life where I decided I was going to stop saying no to myself, and to I started to take seriously the things that I was experiencing, that I was exploring on stage. So I started to question, is this just happening because I want to, create a spectacle, and that is part of it. But I realized that there was quite deep things from quite young that had been there from birth.
Yeah.
That I was exploring, and I kind of retrospectively, having created the work, and having done the thing on stage, kind of could sit back and go, I wonder why I was doing that, you know. So I do think those people are merging in a lot of ways, yeah.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about your dress sense and your kind of aesthetic because, yeah, it's such a big part, I think, of your performance on stage, like how you present yourself. How important do you feel like that sense of expression, that form of expression is for you? And how has it evolved over time as well?
I think
It's kind of linked to what we were just talking about in a way.
yeah,
isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. I think its meaning has evolved for me over the years. I think, you know, when I started, I don't know whether you remember me, you know, with my with my short back and sides.
Of course I do.
And I used to love the crazy jackets, you know. I'd have the jeans on, jeans and a black t-shirt, and then I'd have a crazy jacket on the top of
Yeah.
you know. And it was kind of, you know, it was all downhill from then, really, you know.
Yeah, that was the beginning of like, it was like dipping your toe just outside the box a little bit. You know, you get in and you change your jacket. And now it's like, whoosh.
Yeah. Literally. Even at that time, I get people like, oh, you know, I love that set, but that jacket, mate, you know.
Oh, really? Oh, no. Well, now they would never.
No,
They could never.
I think they just walk out to start with.
Or it's just so clear, like, what you are, who
Yeah.
you are, that it's just like,
Yeah.
come or don't come.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, dressing the way that I do has always had multiple elements to it. I think the very obvious one to me first was kind of exploring things artistically. You know, I liked the idea of creating, you know, within the music itself and the lyrics, I was creating these otherworldly experiences, and I wanted to do that with myself, and I wanted to see my body, my person, as a blank canvas for all of that. And I think that hasn't changed. You know, artistically, my body is a complete blank canvas. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
I literally have no hair. You know, and
Yeah, that's so true.
it's how I like to treat things artistically, because I don't necessarily want to be always necessarily putting across gender nonconformity or implications about gender and queerness all the time. That is, you know, in there, but it's kind of like, you know, for the same reason that a lot of drag queens don't necessarily see it as I'm going out on a limb here because I don't know much about drag queens, but I was
You know more than me, most likely.
I was watching a TED talk from Cheddar Gorgeous the other day,
I do know a bit about Cheddar
Yeah.
Gorge, yeah.
and they were kind of talking about how you know, that they see drag more than dressing like a woman. For them it's like this becoming an alien or something, you know.
Right.
And I enjoy all those aspects of it, the exploration of gender, but also the exploration outside of gender. You know, I think that's all very exciting. But I think a lot of the stuff I've started to realize in retrospect, you know, when I'm looking back at who I am as a person outside of the spectacle, I think it's made me seek out a kind of a way of relating to myself and the world relating to me that feels more comfortable, and that had been there since a long time, you know. So I don't really talk much about it, but I identify as non-binary. I started, you know, using they them pronouns and stuff like that, and kind of I'm at a point in my life where I'm sort of going, you know, what if I clean the slate from all of the social elements that mean that's kind of dictate what you should be and what you shouldn't be, you know, all of the social elements that surround the way that you're born, and the way then in turn society expects you to be, and how that relates to how you feel inside, you know. So that's, you know, that has been a big thing which has come out of me being able to explore that in an artistic way, you know.
I wanted to talk a bit about, I guess, your overall outlook creatively as a person. What kind of advice have you been given that has stuck with you? Or maybe you've given to yourself that you kind of go, yeah, this is something I need to live by generally.
Like a rule for living, sort of.
Yeah, or creatively, or
artistically
just
speaking.
maybe advice that someone's given you that has kind of stuck with you, and you're like, yeah, I do that.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting. There's a couple of things that spring to mind that people have said to me that stuck with me. I think, on the more generalized kind of, navigating your way through the music business and both the artistic side and the industry side, I think it was Kipper who, he was relaying a story that he got from someone else. I can't remember who it was, but somebody gave him the advice to keep building skills and to keep creating opportunities. And if you work hard, at some point the two will meet, And that's kind of given me a bit more of a holistic outlook on the long game that you're playing.
Yeah.
When you're involved in music in general. And I think artistically, the thing that really sticks with me is a lot of it's the classic Bowie interview. And I think it's going round, I've seen it going around Instagram recently.
I don't know if I've seen it recently. Which one? What's he saying?
He, he's sort of sitting there and this, his blonde hair and he's going, never play to the gallery.
Oh, that's so funny. It's that one. Because that's one quote that has stuck with me for so long.
So interesting.
I don't even know what the interview looks like. I just know that quote.
Wow.
So that's crazy that it's that.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
It's that. And if you look at a lot of his interviews, he's saying the same thing in lots of different ways, but he had this outlook of like, an artist creates their worst work when they are fulfilling the
external requirements.
Yeah, external requirements, whether that's from record labels or from some idea of what the audience wants, because really and truly I don't think we can always predict that. But
No.
I think whilst I wouldn't say to someone else that if you quote unquote play to the gallery you're going to create your worst work, but I know from my experience that is when I'm not satisfied with my work, and I think objectively speaking it's not
gonna be it.
hitting,
Yeah.
So I'd say that's one of the quotes, definitely. There's some Joni Mitchell stuff in there as well.
I'm not surprised because I mean she's just amazing.
She's the guy.
Yeah, I follow her on Facebook.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so
she
like,
posts on Facebook.
Yeah, still
Wow.
now. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you need to get on there. It's great. It's just like a daily dose of Joni. It's like, the world's still good. Joni's still here. Like,
she does not pull her punches, does she? Yeah.
No.
she's very opinionated about a lot of things, and I don't agree with everything, but I think that she would describe her way of writing as this kind of process of it. If you sit with it and you tweak it and you tweak this and you tweak that and you tweak this, and then you have this internal sense as an artist, your of when it's right and when it isn't right. And that for me is I think where a lot of, well, for me personally, that's where my artistic voice comes from, is the things you decide to keep and the things you decide to throw away.
Yeah.
And I think you've got to be really instinctive about that, because it's...
No one can do that for you.
No.
And like no one will know the journey that any one song or idea or album has been on.
100%.
And that's pretty cool, like the roads not taken.
Yeah.
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 What could the album have been? What could,
Because you can so paralyze yourself with the roads not taken.
Yeah, it's tough. So tough.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, like, being decisive, knowing your mind is really good. But it takes time. I guess for me, proof, doing stuff enough times, like pushing past that fear or whatever it is, enough times where you start to have faith in your decisions.
It's a hill to get over.
Yeah.
Do you find that comes with every new thing that you make? Do you have to get over that hill every time?
Well, that's an interesting question. Sometimes, because there is a sense of, like, for me, because I think everything I've written has been quite different, there's a sense of unfamiliarity where I'm like, oh, what's the kind of world of this song or the language of this song? Like, what's this getting at? And I have to try and understand that before I can make those decisions.
Yeah.
And sometimes I instantly know what that is in a song. I'm like, I know what this song is. Bang, let's go. Most of the time, it's like I have to take time to get a feel for it. And that can take a day, that can take a week, that can take 2 months. It just depends. So, yeah. I would say there is an element of having to get to that point where I know what I'm aiming for. Then I trust myself, I do.
Yeah.
I think once I know I'm in that place, but it can be quite frustrating getting to that place.
Yeah.
Do you find that?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely relate to the kind of blank slate thing where you go to a new piece of music, and if you're not leaning on the idea of something you've done before, which is kind of a lot of, I mean, that's the way a lot of what you might call technique with writing music is, like, being so good at writing a particular thing that you can churn it out. Whereas when you go to approach something artistically where you're trying to reinvent the wheel every time, and have this completely open view on how something is going to come out, I think you're constantly having that battle where you're going, oh, I did that really great thing, but the next one's coming up, and is it going to go in the right direction this time?
Yeah, no, it's I think that's part of what draws me to it, though, as well, is that endless sense of discovery, or, like, never fully knowing everything. It's that mystery that's really nice, but then you get the satisfaction of, like, I've cracked it. I've cracked this.
Yeah.
This egg has been cracked.
Oh,
yes.
It's a great feeling, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's that struggle that draws me to it every damn time.
Yeah, literally. Through thick and thin.
Yeah.
Till death do us part.
When do you feel, like, most inspired to write, or to just as a person? Because sometimes I feel inspired, but it's not necessarily to write. It might be like, oh, I just feel like my life is art today.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I've been trying to think about this recently, because I'm getting into the space where I've got my next project sort of lined up. I'm finishing production on some bits.
Project? Do you mean? Do
Do
you want to formally? No.
How shall I say this?
EP?
For now, it's going to be a string of singles. It's going to be. It's not necessarily going to be an album statement, but who knows by the end. But I am in a position where I need to create more, and we're always in that position, right? But I've been thinking a lot about what the process is, and how to get back into that headspace, and the other evening I for the first time in about 5 years I took a bath, and I got a bath bomb. I've never used a bath bomb before.
What? Oh my gosh. Okay.
It was
This
a
is
Primark.
huge.
It was a Primark bath bomb.
It's doing it. Rookie error. I mean, I don't know Primark bath bombs, to be fair. But
Primark don't come for me, but, like, I didn't really know what to expect, because I've never seen a bath bomb and never experienced a bath bomb. So I put this bath bomb in. It did some fizzing. I assume that's what was supposed to happen.
yeah.
the water went like a bit orange.
Yeah. Okay. How big was it though? Was it like?
It was about.
Oh, so it's quite
a golf ball.
sizable.
Golf
Oh,
ball.
okay.
Yeah.
You want lush. They
Lush,
do
right.
like epic
Okay.
things with like petals in your bath. And,
Right.
Oh my
They really
God.
set the mood.
yeah.
Yeah, I was mildly underwhelmed, but at the same time, I've had lots of creative ideas since then. I woke up this morning and sorry, I'm not about to start a blues. I woke up this morning.
Ran myself a bag. We gotta stop.
Yeah, we really are. Yeah, so I woke up this morning and I just got an idea for. I've been thinking about this video, or no, this album shoot I'm trying to do, single shoot, sorry, and I just came up with the idea today, you know. So I'm trying to think about ways that I can sort of be completely disconnected from the world and from the idea of I've got to post the next TikTok, and you know, I think personally, I forget a lot of the time what it was like before social media and before there was the expectation that you were constantly on 100.
Yeah.
And just having a moment, an hour or two, to completely disconnect from that, and was really, really, inspiring.
That's really
I think.
nice. That's such a good idea to have a bath. It's so like obvious.
No,
But
it's
it's
true.
a good idea. Like, leave your phone out, bring a book in.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that.
And I think any sort of moment where you can create this space, because I personally, one of the things I find is challenging to navigate is tapping into inspiration, because it's like, I don't know, for me, inspiration happens in the moments where nothing is happening.
Yes.
That's more and more.
That's
We
never.
live in a world where that's not always the case. But it's hard to find that to be the case.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to find those moments more, and I also think with inspiration, I think in my experience to a certain extent, I've realised that there is a certain mechanical element to it, because I always come back to the stream of consciousness thing. You know, if I know that if I sit down and do a certain number, spend a certain amount of time just writing completely stream of consciousness, no judgment, just everything on the page, that I'm going to be in a more creative space than when I started.
Yeah.
And it's that there, I think there's, with any kind of creativity, for me, there's always this dual process where part of it is emotional and all about where you are in your head, but then there's the mechanical element of going through the process of it. So I think that's probably the magic formula.
Just do something. Act, but also space.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. I like that.
Do you have ways you get into it?
I think the space point is relevant. Not something that I've been dwelling on particularly, though I have been going for walks in nature in the mornings. I've been like, okay, I did it once, like last week, and I was like, this is what I needed. Just a chance to breathe. And luckily I have lots of nature nearby. Where you live, you're like right in central, so I don't know if that kind of contributes to your sense of like, oh, this event's happening just down the road, and whereas I feel like I have to actually intentionally like go to things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, luckily I have that, so that's really helped. For me, I love going to exhibitions. That I find so inspiring. Just like I find other people's stories really inspiring. You know, living, dead, doesn't matter. Like just seeing their work, engaging with their work, and in that way of like when you go to an exhibition, you're carving out time from your life.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be on my phone. I'm at an exhibition.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
No, definitely.
And I think it's a similar thing. I guess I have the direct contact with art or music or whatever, film. I love going to cinemas as well. It's a very similar thing of just like...
By
this
yourself?
yeah, or with Alistair, like both carve out time from my life to just look at something.
Yeah.
Something creative, something amazing.
Yeah.
I love reading as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that as well. I find it harder to switch off sometimes when I'm like really on. Reading is so hard. I'm like glossing over the words. Do you know what
Yes,
I
yeah,
mean?
no,
I
I
kind
know
of
that
have to
feeling.
come down a bit sometimes to read, but yeah, I think the idea of space and time is really relevant.
Yeah. And what you said with I mean, taking inspiration from other people. And, I find myself often writing not, even if I am writing in the first person, I'm in somebody else's head. So I did, there's certain key tracks on the Divine album which are actually from my dad's perspective.
Right, okay.
So I would write a lot from, thinking about what it would be like to be him. And that's definitely something which has inspired me, because I think, it's all very well, trying to pretend our lives are very interesting. There's so many
perspectives.
there's so many interesting stories out there.
Yeah.
And even, even from your friends and from people and things that are going on in the world, and there are so many stories out there that whilst as much as it is interesting to look inwards and to look at our own lives, I think I like to have that macro perspective of like, this might be something that I'm feeling and that I'm feeling strongly, but there's this outside context to it, and there's, for me, that's what really adds color to a lot of work, is when it isn't, or when it kind of is all encompassing.
Yeah, it manages to be both.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
And I'm sure there are many exceptions to that, but that's just for me, for my work personally, I think.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, I mean, thinking through like Joni Mitchell songs and stuff like that, I still think she does it quite a lot. Like, manages to sort of pull the macro into the micro a little bit.
Yeah, she
it's clever.
From what I've heard of her in interviews, she's quite intentional about that.
Right.
I mean, she's actually quite. I mean, from the interviews that I've heard, she seems to be very much into like her whole idea of actually music being very autobiographical, which I find quite interesting, because her music stretches to all these different characters. But I think she's very passionate about write what you know, as opposed to the larger than life aspect of somebody like a Bowie, or that personally I really like. I like both approaches myself.
Yeah. So you mentioned you're working on some stuff right now. You said it's using samples and things like that. Sonically, you're drifting towards the produced side. Do you want to talk a bit about that? Because I don't think you have spoken about that.
No, yeah. So I've just been adapting maybe similar ideas to what I was doing on the previous record, but in a different sonic territory.
That's cool.
And I also liked the potential, like a lot of the music I'm into at the moment is very kind of sample based and, electronically produced. And I think in that space, I think there's a lot of room for, going a bit crazy.
And do you feel like now you're a lot more confident to like self-produce things?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So my the last track I just put out, Fireplace, that was self-produced, and I think it was my first fully self-produced track. And the next few tracks are going to be self-produced entirely.
Fab.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So yeah, I suppose that's the other element of the sample-based thing, is that I think it does empower you a little bit more.
Yes, 100%. It's a lot cheaper,
Yeah.
to be frank. Like, if you can produce an album and use electronic samples and trigger pads and whatever, you're free to make what you want to make without being in a studio that costs $5,000 or whatever,
And I think it lends to a different lends itself to a different way of creating as well. I think a lot of the, a lot of the sort of like really genre bendy stuff, where it's suddenly, and it's got sort of samples hither and thither, I'm trying to explain this sound, but like maybe like 100 Gecs type sound where everything is, there's honestly just a bunch of stuff in there which is just hella random, and that for me is so much kind of feels like it lends itself to a process where you can just throw things in and you don't have to book like a studio out to get that sound. I think that the process is pretty dead after them, whereas if you're, I don't know, you're working with, I don't know, Splice or something like that, and you're just kind of throwing things in there and you think, oh, and I've got this software instrument, and you just you work very quickly, and you can tap into this rhythm of real kind of like flow state. And I think it has a different outcome in terms of the sound, and I think it makes it easier to achieve that as well.
It's exciting.
Yeah,
I'm excited to hear it.
Yeah,
hear the new stuff. So how has your outlook changed recently in terms of going forward in your career? What do you feel like you're currently shifting in terms of your outlook, whether that's in the music you're making or just how you're doing things?
I think sonically and genre-wise,
Yeah.
I'm even less concerned with the idea of there being a genre and a sound. I think at the time I was very specific about, right, I want this to be hard soul, when I made the first record, and I think even in practice it sort of became a bit that, but a bit other things as well. And so I think my outlook musically is to lean into that.
Sort of expand.
Yeah, like I've been really inspired by a lot of artists who are doing just that, and way more extreme than I was used to hearing. And I was kind of like, oh, I've been holding back.
Yeah.
Let's
Let
really
loose,
try and
baby.
explore that. Yeah, exactly. And I feel very empowered in that way. In my career, my outlook, what's changed in my outlook? I think there's a couple of things I'm probably going to be doing differently. I think, releasing singles and really focusing on world building within the singles rather than within the album, I think is one thing that I'm going to be doing. I'm probably not going to make another full-length music video for a while. Like I've got a full-length music video coming out for Fireplace this Friday. Yeah. And that's probably going to be the last one I'm going to do for a while, because I guess for two reasons. One, that it feels like nowadays, where you're an artist who's trying to get heard, there are more efficient ways of doing that in one sense, because you can spend hours and hours and hours and hours and days perfecting this 3-minute clip, or you can flip that on its head and make lots of clips that are all shot vertically, and that people are all, they're kind of that's what, and that will get more traction. Those TikTok videos, Instagram reels, and stories will get more people looking at what you're doing. So I think there's that element, but then I think the other side of it is, next time I do come to a music video, where I realize now that it really is an artistic statement. I want to I want to do one thing which has been really, really carefully thought out, and where all the budget has gone into that one thing. So it's this, really, I mean, you've got that beautiful video. I can't remember what song it's Solved. Yeah. Which is really, every shot is beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about that video. And I think the next time I do something like that, I'd like it to be, making attempting to make a similarly artistically striking statement, but I don't think I'm in the right place career-wise and idea-wise yet.
Yeah,
and
that's
I'm okay with that.
Fair. Yeah, that's completely fair, and great that you can still make steps forward and kind of know where to prioritize your energy. Because I guess that's what it is. It boils down to is like limited time, limited energy, limited money. How are you going to spend it and kind of get the most impact and progression in the way you want it that suits you long term. So yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to thank you so much for doing this. It's been so lovely.
Yeah.
I just think back to like us at Brit kind of learning about the music industry, and I wonder what little Ben would have thought about Ben now, and also just the world that you're in now.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I feel like, I think if I met myself at that time, I'd have to sit myself down and say, honey, take a seat. We need to talk. No, I think, oh wow, that is something I have...
Have you ever thought about that?
Not to that particular period in time. I've thought about when I was really, really young. But that particular, teenage years are just awkward though, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, I think there's a part of me that you know, I think we were at Brit at a time where the music industry was kind of in flux, wasn't it?
Yeah.
There was that go to a label model, and then there was the do-it-yourself thing, and I think I'd probably go back and say, you know, the rules are about to change.
Yeah. Yes, it was very much like 50-50, but then I still felt like Brit was kind of back in the like labels way, or like they hadn't fully prepared us, because how could they for what was coming?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of us in our heads were like, oh, I know there's this like do-it-yourself thing, but I think I'm just gonna do the label thing or wait, because that's been done, and I think I'm backing that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it was like, it was
100%.
very new.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's, I think I'd probably say the same thing.
I think I probably also, you know, I think in terms of the music I'm into, in terms of my outlook, I mean, I was fairly open-minded for a teenager, I think.
Yeah.
But I was you know, a lot of the music I listen to nowadays, I would have scoffed at the time, I think. I think I would have been so in that kind of like traditionalist mindset that to see myself now taking a very non-traditionalist approach and almost sort of, you know, going against the idea of this is how it's got to be done. You know, I'm almost anti-purist now. I'm just like, you know, whatever, however you get there, you get there. You know, I think that would be quite a culture shock for me of old.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd also probably tell them to chill out. You know, that things will be okay. You know.
Yeah, I don't think you're doing half badly. So here we are. Thank you.
My absolute pleasure, darling.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time.
Cause